Let's see, the Alameda County Transportation Commission, this is from the county, so I'll read this to you. By the way, this is obviously a two-county effort. This is both Alameda County and Contra Costa County, and I'm speaking as mayor. I'm also speaking as Albany's representative to the Alameda County Transportation Commission. The Alameda County Transportation Commission and its public agency partners. And I should mention that the public agency partners are not just the cities, it's also the transit. AC Transit is an important partner here as well. The public agency partners will consider all the input that is gathered before selecting a concept or a blend of the concepts to further develop soon, the summer of 2019. The work will include detailed traffic studies and other technical work necessary to ensure that changes will achieve their intended purpose, which is to improve travel for everyone who uses San Pablo Avenue. So I'll turn it over to the county. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So what we're going to do today is give you a quick overview. I think many of you have been here for a while and have sort of walked around and seen the stations, but we're just going to walk you through the three options that we want your feedback about tonight, or going forward. We have an online survey, and then we'll have some Q&A here, as well as just open stations afterwards. You can walk around and ask more detailed questions and provide feedback. We do have over in that corner some iPads that are ready for people to do online surveys and provide feedback, as well as a postcard with a link to the online survey. So we definitely want to get your input on all of the options that are on the various display boards today. As the mayor mentioned, San Pablo Avenue corridor for this project is a very long corridor. It's 14 miles, it's 2 counties. Much of it is also a Caltrans facility, so they're another big partner involved in this project. And a lot of local planning work has been done for the corridor, so we're really building off of a lot of these planning efforts, but a lot of them looked at one mode, so they maybe said a bus lane or a bike lane, but they didn't look at what actually all fits when you put it together on the street and lay it out and start to better understand the trade-offs. So that's what this project is doing, is really looking at a lot of the local or mode-based plans and trying to see, when you actually lay it all out, what are the trade-offs? None of the options you'll see before you today are your perfect silver bullet to fixing and improving San Pablo, but we want to hear what you think about the various trade-offs that the different options represent. There is a lot of growth both happening right now along San Pablo and anticipated in the future. Every city, all 7 cities, have identified San Pablo as a primary area for growth going forward. So while today it is overall functioning pretty well for a major urban corridor, as we look into the future, it becomes much more challenging. And in order to really accommodate that growth, we know we need to make improvements to the street. The purpose and goals for the project, the purpose is really to improve multimodal mobility. Again, as the mayor mentioned, not just designing for the auto, but looking at all modes, trying to use the street, in improving efficiency and safety in an effort to really sustainably meet our goals for the corridor, to be able to serve current and future residents and businesses and support local economies, knowing that we have a very diverse corridor. You'll see these 3 different options. We don't expect that one option would be the entire corridor. I think we really need to take into account the local contexts. So Kathleen is going to walk us through the detailed concepts, and then we're going to try and save as much time for Q&A and discussion, and then the breakout sessions.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. So we did actually a very extensive existing conditions analysis for this project to really understand what is going on San Pablo today, beyond what you can see, what are traffic conditions, where are those people going? So I wanted to just point out a few highlights of that analysis. First is that safety is really a major issue. This is one of the highest injury corridors in Alameda County for all modes, so bicyclists, pedestrians, and autos. Autos are actually doing relatively well today for an urban arterial, given all the activity that's happening on San Pablo. The bus, on the other hand, is not not particularly competitive. It's slower than driving, and it tends to be unreliable. Between a fifth and a quarter of buses are arriving significantly after the time when they're supposed to arrive. So the 72R, for example, is scheduled to run every 12 minutes, and about a quarter of buses are arriving more than 18 minutes after the prior bus, which puts it into that category of you can't just walk out to the street and catch the bus and count on one coming in the next 5 or 10 minutes. It's getting into that 20-minute range where it becomes a less reliable option for people to count on. There's also a lot of loading activity. There's a lot of businesses and commercial activity on San Pablo. There's also a lot of senior facilities, people with disabilities who are doing ADA drop-offs and pickups. So loading is also, we think about parking, but loading is also a significant need. And one thing that's notable about San Pablo is that right off the corridor, it gets into residential neighborhoods quite quickly. Even in areas of the corridor that are a little bit higher density, there's residential neighborhoods immediately off it that are single-family homes, sometimes very narrow streets. So loading on cross streets or on some of those alternative roads is actually not, in some places, not possible, and in some places just inappropriate to have large trucks circulating through some of those residential neighborhoods. So that's just a constraint to keep in mind as you're thinking about how to redesign the street. The crossing conditions is something we've heard about a lot. It's very obvious through our technical analysis, but we've also heard a lot of feedback from people from both a pedestrian and a bicyclist standpoint that it's difficult and uncomfortable to cross San Pablo today. Their crosswalks aren't very frequent, and where there are crosswalks, they aren't very visible, and people don't feel safe. The final thing I'll note is that in that origin and destination analysis we did, we found that just under a third of trips of people who are using San Pablo today aren't actually coming from or going to anywhere on the corridor. So they are just using San Pablo as a through street because it's a convenient alternative to I-80 or a convenient way to get to some other part of one of the cities. So that's just a point to keep in mind as you're thinking about how to use the right-of-way. Looking to the future, as Carolyn mentioned, there is a lot of growth projected for the future and already happening, a lot of development already happening. And with that growth will come congestion. So projections for future conditions on San Pablo if we do nothing is that congestion will be significantly worse. Delay at intersections will be significantly worse. So one of the points of this project is to see proactively if there's things we can do to give people better options, knowing that a more congested future is coming. In particular, the bus is going to be even more bogged down in that congestion that it is today. So our analysis shows that the bus travel time will likely be about twice as long as today in the year 2040, which is what our future modeling year. We also know that there will be significant pedestrian and bicycle activity. If there's more mixed use, more dense development on San Pablo, that will mean more people walking, potentially more people biking along the corridor. So getting into the concepts, which hopefully you had a chance to glance at before we sat down, this is sort of a framework of some of the constraints that we were working within to actually develop these concepts. So the first is that we're really looking at just using existing curb-to-curb right-of-way, which throughout most of Alameda County is about 73 or 74 feet. So the sidewalks are, if anything, in some places maybe should be widened, but we're working with so little right-of-way, we didn't want to cut into the sidewalk. So we're really just looking curb to curb. We're designing, all these concepts are 73 feet wide, sort of prototypical width for Alameda County. There are sections in Contra Costa that actually get a lot wider in El Cerrito, but we were designing for sort of the common denominator of 73 feet. Another thing to know is there are streets where the intersections widen out a bit. There's a lot of demands at the intersection with turning movements, people crossing, and the like. San Pablo is not a street where that happens. So the intersections are also 73 to 74 feet wide. The intersections are really where the tough design trade-offs end up being made. That's where the most demand is. So we're sort of designing for the intersection in a lot of ways. Community access, we know there's a lot of neighborhoods. There also is getting to and from I-80 on a lot of the cross streets. So those turning movements on and off of San Pablo, and also opportunities to cross San Pablo, are really important to make sure that San Pablo does not become more of a barrier, but really continues to be a community asset and increasingly is a place that people want to spend time. So that community access component and being able to cross the street, we know is a really key piece. The next thing is, we've heard a lot about speeding and traffic calming or slowing people down, again, from that safety perspective. And the only way to really do a road diet is to dedicate a lane to the bus. If you were to shrink the number of lanes and have everyone using that single lane, autos and trucks in the bus, it would really degrade conditions even more for the bus and autos. So the options we're looking at that are really traffic calming options are by dedicating a lane to the bus so that we can preserve and enhance the performance of the bus. And the final thing I'll mention is just that basic pedestrian safety enhancements, more visible crosswalks, better lighting, beacons to make the crosswalks more visible, those are considered baseline improvements. So any project we do will have basic pedestrian safety improvements. You don't necessarily see them illustrated on all these concepts. That's because we consider them a done deal. They will be part of any project we move forward. So with that, I'll get into the actual concepts. So we started with think of it like a funnel. We started with all the possible ways we could design the right-of-way, and we've sort of filtered it down, and we ended up with 3 that we actually took through our evaluation process. And I just want to reiterate that we're at a very conceptual level of design at this stage of the project. So the idea here was to do 3 very contrasting visions of what San Pablo could look like in the future. The exact design details of every intersection are by no means reflected in the drawings you see today. So every intersection is different. Small residential street intersections with San Pablo are very different than University or Buchanan. What you're seeing here is prototypical concepts that are sort of a representative example to give us a sense of what the trade-offs would be for these big moves, big right-of-way trade-offs of how we can use the right-of-way. So there's 3 that we're looking at. One adds both bus lanes and bike lanes, dedicated bus lanes and dedicated bike lanes on San Pablo, and goes down to 1 auto lane in each direction. The second is also adds a dedicated bus lane and looks at a managed lane concept. So for those of you who are familiar with Ashby Avenue in Berkeley, where there's 2 lanes in each direction at peak traffic periods, and then there's parking on the side of the street during off-peak periods, we're looking at something similar to that on San Pablo, where for most of the day, there would be parking on the side of the street, and then 1 auto lane and a bus lane. But then during the afternoon peak period, which is the time of day when there's the most traffic, that parking lane on the curb would convert to an auto through lane just for a few hours in the afternoon and then convert back to parking. And the final concept is we were looking at what would be possible for the bus with small sort of spot treatments without actually dedicating a lane. So not dedicating a bus lane, adding a bike lane, and maintaining 2 lanes of auto traffic. So these are just the drawings of the concepts. We can get into much more detail on each, all the design details of these, but this is the concept A, which is bus and bike lanes. You'll see these are center running bus lanes, and they have actually center stations here. So these are, the bus would stop in the middle of the street and people would board and get off the bus at those locations. And these are the bus lane. It would actually be a protected, bike. I keep mixing bus and bike. This is a protected bike lane that has actually a raised buffer so that you can't actually have a car cross over into the lane. It's actually fully protected. A couple things to note about these, some of the trade-offs necessary for this design is at these intersections where there is a station, you'll see that there's not enough room for a left turn lane. So this has 1 through lane. It maintains a right turn lane that's actually mixed with the bicycle lane, just because there's not enough space to maintain that bicycle lane all the way through the intersection. So if you want to have a right turning movement, you have to have that mixing zone. But there's no space for a left turn lane. So one of the compromises or trade-offs with this design is that at a major intersection like University, for example, where you have a a bus station, and it's a major transfer point for other bus lines, pretty important bus lines. You would have to choose between either having a station or a left turn lane. So that's one of the trade-offs, not as big a deal at the non-station locations. So that's concept A, and again, we can field any more detailed questions you have at the stations. So concept B is very similar in terms of the bus lanes. It's a center-running bus facility with the stations in the middle of the street. This one does not have a bike facility on San Pablo, so it would be accommodating bicyclists on an enhanced parallel route to San Pablo, and a parallel street. It maintains parking along the entire day, 24 hours a day, on one side of the street. And on the other side of the street, it would have parking for most of the day, but then during that peak period, this northbound lane would convert to a travel lane. One opportunity this provides is in the shadow of this parking lane. You can have what we call pedestrian bulb outs, or extensions of the curb, which make pedestrians more visible and shorten the crossing distance for people. And so then just getting into we have not developed a fixed parallel bike route that we would improve. We've been working with cities and stakeholders to look at what are all the options for what a parallel route could be. And at the station on the parallel route, you can look at all the options we've developed for the whole corridor. Right here, I'm just showing the Albany section. You have the Keynes and Adams couplet that the city is actually working on right now. And then getting up here on the east side of the street, you have the Albany Greenway, which goes into Contra Costa County. So these are some of the options of parallel routes that could be enhanced as part of this project if you didn't have a facility on San Pablo Avenue. The final concept is concept C. This one does not dedicate a lane to the bus, and it has 2 auto lanes in each direction and adds a bike lane very similar to the one in concept A. Both this and concept A, a significant amount of the parking is removed to accommodate these other needs. So in both concept A, as you may have noticed in here, there's parking on one side of the street just mid-block. One reason we're pulling parking on all the designs back from the intersections is actually for visibility reasons, for safety reasons. One of the most of the safety concerns for pedestrians and bicyclists are happening near the intersections. And if you can pull the parking back a bit from the intersections, you give people way better visibility. Autos approaching the intersection so that they're not hitting pedestrians who are crossing the street. So that's something you'll see on all the designs, but on this one, we actually it can only fit mid-block because it won't fit on the other side of the street. The other thing I'll mention about this is that the bus definitely doesn't perform as well in the future with this condition. Even with all the spot treatments we can do, there are bus islands on the side here. So the bus wouldn't have to pull into the curb and pull back into merge back into traffic. It would be able to just stop in the lane, pick up people, and then continue on its way. And we've looked at queue jump lanes so that it can skip queues at intersections. But even with all those treatments, its travel speed and reliability are significantly degraded in the future in this concept without the bus lane. So this is just a quick summary of our evaluation findings of those 3 concepts. Like I said, if you really want to preserve or enhance bus performance in the future, that dedicated lane is pretty critical. By dedicating a lane and going down to 1 auto lane in each direction, there is significant auto diversion off of San Pablo. So I mentioned at the beginning that about just under a third of trips on San Pablo today aren't going anywhere on the corridor or coming from anywhere on the corridor. About that same number, our analysis shows would not be on the corridor at all in the future. So they would choose some other route because San Pablo would no longer be as attractive as just a through street if it were down to 1 lane. Again, preserving access to and from I-80 at major intersections is pretty critical, again, from a traffic flow perspective. The bicycle facility on San Pablo, I showed that it has sort of a mixing zone with the right turn lane at intersections. That really undermines the comfort of that facility on San Pablo. So it's generally the comfort of a facility is dictated by the weakest link. So if it's really comfortable to bike on, but that at every intersection it becomes very stressful, where you're mixing with auto traffic, then overall the facility as a whole is much less attractive for a wide range of cyclists. So San Pablo generally, given the need to have turning movements and community access, it's difficult to create a truly low-stress, comfortable facility on San Pablo. The parallel route does offer the ability to have a truly all ages and abilities type of facility that would attract all types of bicyclists and all comfort levels. Curbside loading, I've mentioned before, that is still a critical need. And just the final thing to mention is that we do recognize that to construct these options, it does have some community disruption, and we would be developing a plan to mitigate those, but there would be some short-term community disruption for actually constructing some of these options. So just next steps, we are amidst this is the final slide, and then we'll get to Q&A. We're amidst a big round of public engagement right now. We're doing several workshops like this. This is actually the first one. We're doing focus groups with various stakeholder groups, seniors, people with disabilities, transit riders. We are going to be at many events, public events that are happening in the next month or two. We're doing intercept surveys at high traffic locations. And there's an online survey, which we have postcards over there that have the link to the online survey. We'd love you all to take the survey before you leave today, where you can give your opinions about which alternatives you like and trade-offs of different design details on the corridor. We are looking to refine these three kind of big visions down to a narrower set of options for us to go into more detailed project development and design this summer. So we are looking to move this forward after this round of outreach into the next stage, which is more detailed design. So with that.
Just one thing I forgot to mention in the beginning, we are recording this so that they can put it up on Albany TV, so I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that before we move into Q&A.
So with that, I think we can take a few questions right now, and then we want to leave a little bit of time at the end for people to go around to the boards again and ask any more detailed questions. It's definitely a little bit easier to answer really detailed questions when you actually have the designs right in front of you. So with that, I'm happy to take a couple questions.
I'm going to ask folks to use the microphone so that people who are going to watch this can hear your question.
So a broad question is, San Pablo is part of the I-80 intermobility corridor, or
ICM. I can't remember what integrated corridor.
Integrated mobility corridor. How has that affected the options that you've explored, and what are the requirements for San Pablo going forward based on that?
So it's probably going to affect us more as we go forward and do a lot of the analysis of the actual traffic operational impacts, because we haven't gotten to that stage of the project yet. We do know that there are major left turns or right turn movements for people accessing 80, and so that connection from San Pablo to 80 is going to be the critical link that Caltrans is really wanting us to evaluate in great detail to understand if we take a lane for bus and only go down to one auto lane, can they still use San Pablo as they've anticipated in that project? So that's going to be a big thing we have to study. The other question that has come up is, if there is an incident in 80 where they are then directing traffic to San Pablo, like the I-80 ICM project calls for, could the bus lane then be open to other traffic? And I think that's something that we would be considering going forward, is under those types of scenarios where they actually activate it, you would probably need to use that bus lane for all users. Where did the microphone? Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question. It appears as if the bus islands in the middle, they'll go down, say, a whole block or several blocks until a major intersection. Does that mean then, for all three concepts, that you cannot make a left turn onto any street except a major intersection?
Yes, so we would only be able to make a left turn at a signalized intersection, because you would have to be able to facilitate that left turn across the bus lane. So it wouldn't necessarily only be at station locations, but it would only be at signalized intersections. So
anywhere where there's a street light?
Anywhere where there's a street light, and we may be adding street lights to some locations to ensure there are sufficient left turn opportunities in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hi. So if you guys are just picking out of the 3 concepts right now, is it going to be one concept that has to be integrated into all of the cities, or are they going to be different concepts per city?
So it definitely might be a hybrid. For one, I'll say the final design will not necessarily be any of these concepts as they currently exist. So it might be a blend of them that we end up choosing. It also might vary by geography. That said, for something like a bus lane, the more continuous and the longer it is, the more effective it is. And we definitely wouldn't want it to be every city doing something different. So a bus lane and then the bus lane drops and a bus lane and the bus lane drops. So there's some elements where continuity is very important, like the bus lane. There are some components, like the bike lane, we know that parallel facilities are more viable in some parts of the corridor than in others. So potentially there could be a bike lane on San Pablo where parallel facilities are actually very difficult to identify, which is the furthest south and the furthest north part of the corridors. The street network intersects with San Pablo at an angle and becomes less regular. And so it's harder to find a parallel route that's really truly parallel to San Pablo. So a bike lane might be something where it's on part of the corridor but not another part, because we know there's an alternative. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Just to follow up, was the BRT approved for the entire corridor, or is the BRT coming?
I don't think officially. So there are many plans that have been approved that have had BRT in them. It's been in several regional plans. AC Transit has a major corridor study that identifies BRT on San Pablo. For this project, BRT has not been approved.
Okay, but that essentially would be a BRT.
Yeah, yeah.
What is PRT?
Oh, bus rapid transit.
Yeah, as we've been told over the years, this is a state highway, so I assume Caltrans will have some input.
Yeah.
And is their input predicated or related to legislation that would require the state to consider multimodal transportation? I believe that was proposed at some time. The other question is, I assume there's going to be CEQA issues here. And CEQA will have the no project alternative. I think it would be healthy just to include a concept D, which is a no project alternative just at the onset.
Yeah. I'll answer the second question first, which is that it will. And the survey actually has no changes, so existing conditions as an option that people can choose. So we kept, in terms of actual, when you're filling out the survey and expressing your opinions formally, in terms of Caltrans, they do have an official adopted framework that's around multi-mobility, and that is definitely informing their decisions. I don't know that they do talk about it.
Yeah, and I know the legislation you're talking about, they have specifically, San Pablo is sort of a poster child for a lot of the types of multimodal analysis they are requiring to be done now for all of their projects.
That legislation hasn't passed yet, is it? Am I wrong? Is that legislation?
It's up right now, but they have already, as part of other Caltrans efforts, started implementing and requiring multimodal analysis. So we think that will be coming sort of regardless of what happens with the legislation. They have provided comments for all modes, actually, when we've been meeting with their staff so far. So they are focused on safety, I'd say, first and foremost, and then they have provided sort of a lot of auto comments, but also a lot of bike comments.
I've been wanting to see for pedestrians, safety for pedestrians to cross San Pablo, and it sounds like there's a lot of plans for that. I was curious, one intersection I've been interested for a number of years to try to improve also has a lot of water running down it that I was told that would mean that bulb outs couldn't be there very easily, but that if there was storm drains were installed, then maybe that was possible. If this stuff all gets ripped up, is it possible to put in proper storm drains and things under the street at that time?
Yeah, I think when we actually get into doing the detailed designs, things like storm drains and green infrastructure have definitely been things that have already been brought up as being needed. And on your first comment, pedestrian safety has sort of been the #1 issue we've heard from every focus group we've met with, whether it's the transit riders, bike users, seniors, and people with disabilities. It's really been #1 is pedestrian safety.
Yeah, there's common routes to schools across there and everything. And is one of the standard things you said there'll be a number of standard crossing improvements or bulb outs, some of that?
Yes, bulb outs, a lot of just high visibility crosswalks and painting, better lighting has been something we've heard a lot about. And then looking at different better automatic pedestrian crossings that actually gives you the countdown. And so we are assuming a lot of those types of improvements and curb ramps, things that are pretty basic but make it a lot safer and more comfortable for pedestrians.
I will offer on the bulb out specifically that on the concepts that have a bike lane, there isn't room at the intersection for kind of a traditional bulb out. So there are creative ways you can still have, like if you had a raised bike lane, that could be an area where pedestrians could also stand, but there will be that mixing with the bicyclists who are coming through. So I think the concepts with bike lanes have slightly different bulb out opportunities than this concept, which has explicitly, like this is a classic bulb out in the shadow of the parking lane where it's just a true curb extension, that the sidewalk is sort of a seamless extension. So there are differences between the concepts in how bulb outs could be designed.
It seems to me that we're kind of in a period of transition transportation-wise, and we really don't know what's going to be going on in 10 years. Is now the time to be thinking of a radical change like this when self-driving cars, car share, we don't know what's going to be coming down the line.
Yeah.
What are you, is there a source or is there some sort of analysis you're referring to that's projecting how things will be? And whose tea leaves are those?
Yeah. So I would say we don't have a specific set of tea leaves, but one thing we have talked about is preserving the space for high capacity modes. So one thing we know is if everyone keeps driving in their own automobile in the future, it will be a very congested future. Even if those are all automated cars, if there's one person in all of them, given how many people there will be, that will be a very congested future. So preserving space for high capacity modes on San Pablo to move large numbers of people efficiently is something that we do think is going to be a need regardless of what exactly the technology is. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, but I think that's something that we as transportation planners grapple with. A lot of the long-range planning goes out to 2040, and it feels sort of foolish to be talking about 2040 with any certainty. But also, we feel like when we look and we see new development going on along San Pablo, we know new growth is coming. So to do nothing also feels irresponsible. Yeah. So I think we're in that moment where we need to start looking at what we could do, knowing that the world might be a fundamentally different place than we think in 10 years. For better or worse, most of these projects take a solid 10 years to get implemented. So we might learn a lot in the next few years as we're taking this through environmental, as we're taking it through design. And we are thinking about how we can kind of future test some of these as we narrow it down to one option. And I think that's where we sort of fall back to pedestrian safety improvements are being needed no matter what. Preserving space for high capacity movement is something that we know with more and more people on the corridor, something we should be looking at. But yeah, it's a challenging time right now in transportation.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing, which is phasing is going to be a really big part of this. So on all our materials, we say we're developing a long-term vision and near-term improvements. So we'd really like to get some improvements out there quickly. And that is probably not going to be a full BRT system in 2 years. That is going to be safety improvements. The idea of developing the long-term vision is that anything we build in the short term won't preclude what we want to do in the long term, but we do want to phase once we determine a long-term vision, whatever makes sense to phase more quickly, especially around safety improvements, we're looking to move forward as quickly as we can. Yeah.
Quick question. For those who might have to leave quickly or those who are not here, is the same survey on your website?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so with that
yeah, because we know there is another community event starting like 8 minutes ago that I think quite a few people are trying to sort of attend both. So I think Councilmember Moss has a question, and then we can move to the tables. And there is a postcard there that people can take that has a link to the online survey. If you'd rather just do that in your own leisure, absolutely. It's open till the end of April.
Yeah, so April 30th.
So you mentioned cargo and transfer. How does that work in each one of these concepts? Are there going to be cargo zones? Are you going to have to restrict that to maybe late at night or early in the morning? What's the ideas around that?
So we haven't gotten into the level of detail of doing actual like loading plans, but we do know that some amount of loading space needs to be maintained on the curb for businesses. And that's one of the things we grappled with in trying to design bike options that wouldn't turn into loading zones, because that's been a challenge where we have seen some protected bike lanes in the region. So we are, at this point, concepts A and C do remove more parking, and that's one of the trade-offs, is that also means you're removing more loading, whether it be loading for businesses or as things like Uber and Lyft becomes more and more prevalent, also loading for people, or with a lot of senior centers along the facility, loading for people who have mobility challenges. So loading is definitely a challenge on this commercial corridor. And I know Amy had, so we do 2 more questions, then move to tables, because I know a lot of people are trying to go to 2 events.
Mine's super quick, sorry, Amy. Is it an AC transit lane? Or when you say buses only, does that include Genentech shuttles, LBL shuttles, et cetera?
So we have made no policy decision about what would go in a bus lane. I will say it's been handled differently in the region. So San Francisco, one of their bus lanes now is allowing other shuttles and buses in there. That was a decision they made recently. And so that would be a decision that would need to be made at a later time. We do know that there's also the Emory Go-Round in Emeryville. There's a number of shuttles. If a Kaiser facility does come in Berkeley, Kaiser often has their own shuttles. So there are a number of high occupancy, as Kathleen mentioned, vehicles. So I think there would be a need to look at it as a high occupancy lane and understand what that would mean for the bus operations. We just haven't dug into that yet.
Question and a comment. Question, I walk and bike on San Pablo a lot. I live a block off San Pablo. And I notice every time I walk and bike, there are tons of little tiny parking lots on either side, everywhere. And I'm wondering if, and that obviously would, use of that, even creative utilization, would really help mitigate loss of parking on San Pablo itself. Wondering if you've done a count of that. And that goes, I know there are a lot of small parking lots in Albany and Berkeley as well. Wondering if you've done a count of spots in those lots.
We haven't done a full count of parking lot facilities. We have done analysis of parking on San Pablo itself and looked at occupancy, found it was full about 60% of the time. But we haven't actually done a full survey of parking lots. There are a lot of business changes happening and land use changes happening along San Pablo. So some of those parking lots are being developed, others are not being developed. That is something that as we start winnowing down which options we're going to take forward, we start seeing where across the 14-mile corridor there's more interest in the options that remove parking. I think we'll try to dig into that in more detail.
And just a comment, last week I saw that Caltrans came up with specifications for parklets on state highways, and there's one in Reading, so that's, I guess, the first one. So something like that would be, would fit perfectly in with the fact that, slowing things down, making more community area, things of that sort. So since they've now okayed that and come up with specs, that would help, that would go well with what we're hopefully trying to do here.
Thank you. So I think we will be here, and there's a number of people around to help answer questions or at the boards. We really appreciate you being here tonight. This is sort of our first open house forum for the project, and we do, as I mentioned, have iPads over in the corner and surveys. We would love to get your input, what you like and don't like about concepts. We're looking at this summer to make some decisions about winnowing down what we take through to the next stage of project development. But again, thank you, and thank you, Albany, for hosting us.